You know what it's time for?
I'm ready.
Psaki bombs.
Yeah.
Let's see what we got this week. Well, this week was a week in which Jen Psaki got called out by no less than the Washington Post for her comment that she made at the podium the other day about Republicans and taxes.
Our focus continues to be on highlighting the fact that congressional Republicans want to raise taxes on half of Americans, squeezing the budgets of middle-class families.
That's as big a lie as she has ever told, ever. And the Washington Post gave her 3 Pinocchios for that one, which is about as high as you can get, basically saying, liar, liar, pants on fire. No, the Republicans do not want to raise taxes. They want to cut taxes. The Republicans under Donald Trump did cut taxes. They did not raise them. And for Jen Psaki to say that they want to raise taxes on middle-class families is an outrageous lie. And everyone in that press room knew it was a lie. But most of them ignored it and let it go because they're going to try to cover for her and protect her. Well, wasn't the only bomb she dropped. Here's another one on trying to pretend that Joe Biden really wasn't paying any attention to the Supreme Court leak of those likely documents that will lead to the overturning of Roe v. Wade.
Does the president think the leaker should be punished?
Again, that's up for the Department of Justice and others to determine. What our focus is on is not getting our distracted or our eye off the ball of what is most important to people across the country here, which is not the leak and the story of the leak.
I'm sure she's not wanting to talk about the leak, but the fact is whoever leaked that breached some of the most precious walls of integrity that the Supreme Court has, which is that if you work there, particularly if you work for a justice as a law clerk, you keep your mouth shut. You might be privy to some of the goings-on. Now, I actually had a person ask me this week in a radio interview that I did, but what's so wrong about the leak? Why is that such a problem? Shouldn't we have transparency? Well, maybe that sounds good, but let me tell you why it absolutely is a horrible idea. In the early processes of the Supreme Court looking at a case, they've historically always been able to have the most candid conversations among themselves about the merits of the case and what they thought. They argued, they debated, and they did it behind closed doors because they knew that they could speak their minds, maybe be proven wrong, maybe be proven right, but the point is they were free to openly express questions, doubts, concerns, or advocacy, and ultimately come to a conclusion. Many times, Supreme Court justices have been persuaded by their peers to change their initial point of view. But if you knew what their point of view was from the beginning and how they changed it and why they changed it, it might cause Supreme Court justices to never talk candidly with each other because they would be afraid that what they said and the manner in which they said it would be leaked to the public. So what it does, it has a chilling effect, meaning this, that however a justice initially looks at an issue, he's probably frozen in time by that issue unless he knows or she knows that there is complete freedom to openly discuss it. That's why it is incredibly dangerous, because this will divide the court and it will freeze the court and it will impale the court on the, really on the banner of inefficiency like nothing ever has. And it's just incredibly unfortunate. I hope the person who did the leaking will be discovered, publicly outed, criminally charged, and will never ever have a law license, be practice law, and would never be able to profit from his or her crime by writing a book or being on television and being a host, and would have to give the profits to the government for whatever gain they may have had from the activity that they participated in. It is really a serious, serious issue. So for Jen Psaki to pretend like we don't care, it's no big deal to us, just shows you how out of touch they are with the law and with reality. First of all, this is kind of interesting because Jen Psaki is saying that Joe Biden really wants to work with Republicans. Let's watch.
Now, at the same time, he's always believed that in working with Republicans in good faith and finding ways to do that. And he will continue to do that.
I'm sure he will. But it's kind of interesting. Jen Psaki said he really wants to work with Republicans. And then, almost like the same day, Joe Biden goes to the podium and insults the very people he claims he wants to work with. Watch this one.
Because this MAGA crowd is really the most extreme political organization that's existed in American history, in recent American history.
That's a pretty big statement. First of all, he says that. He throws the shot. Then he won't take any follow-up questions. He just turns and walks away like he does, like off into the sunset. But think about what he said. This MAGA crowd. Well, that happens to represent, what, 70 million voters in America? Half the country? And his attitude is this MAGA crowd is the most extreme political movement in American history. Really, Joe? Worse than the Klan? Worse than the Night Riders? Worse than the people who bombed and tried to destroy the federal government back in the 60s? People with the Students for Democrat Society and Weather Underground groups? Really? Are you talking about they're worse than Antifa, that went into major cities in the summer of 2020 and burned police cars and assaulted cops by the hundreds, if not thousands? Worse than that? Simply people that happen to believe in strong borders, lower taxes, the MAGA crowd. You know, those of us who voted to put America first rather than to put some people in China first. Oh, I'm just stunned that Joe Biden thinks that that's the worst extreme political organization in American history. No wonder you walked away, Joe. You realized what you said and you thought, that's the dumbest thing I've ever said. And that's saying something, and you walked off. All right, here's another one on this MAGA crowd. So Jen Psaki is now questioned about his comment because people at least were paying attention enough, and she slides out of this one, or at least attempts to.
The MAGA crowd, as you call them today, this was almost half the people who voted in 2020. Does the president ever feel maybe there could have been done, he could have done more early on, trying to reach out to those people? And does the extreme rhetoric basically signal that, you know, there's no going back now and they're sort of out of, you know, beyond the pale for him? And yeah.
I think what the president will be judged by Americans by his actions and what he does to make their lives better.
You know, Pam, before we started, your observation was you actually agree with Jen Psaki on something.
For the first time since she's been at that podium, I told the governor before we started, I said, I can't believe I agree with Jen Psaki on this, but she is exactly right. I do think that the president will be judged by Americans and ultimately by his actions.
Yeah.
So there you go. I agree, Jen.
I do too. You know, at first I was thinking, you agree with what? And then I realized what she said there. He'll be judged by his actions.
Absolutely.
And he is being judged by his actions. Every day that you go and you squeeze the handle on the pump to put gasoline in your car, I'll bet you're thinking, thanks, Joe. And when you go to the grocery stores and the prices you pay are 20% higher than they were when he took office, you're probably thinking, yep, I'm going to judge you by your actions because your policies are hurting me. And on top of that, he wants to do things that make no sense, like saying we're going to forgive all the student loan debts. And I'm thinking, okay, what about all the people that have other kinds of debts? You going to do those too? Why just students? These are the people who, by the way, because they took out loans and got a college education, probably make a lot more than the people who didn't get a student loan and go to college. So what are you going to do for them? So you're going to say to those folks that make less money, you're going to pay for the people who make a lot more than you do, and we're going to give them a bump. And by the way, most of those are going to be upper middle class white kids. So that's brilliant. That's just brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm sure Americans will judge you by that.